The sky above was filled with dark storm clouds, swirling together like monstrous tsunamis. At first, the wind was hushed, but soon a furious gale erupted, howling violently as if the heavens were about to collapse. No one, not even the strongest, could stand firm against such a powerful wind. Mrs. Hoa's water jar was toppled and flattened by the onslaught. Her chickens shrieked frantically, unable to find shelter. The farming tools she'd left in the yard were scattered everywhere. A moment later, the rain began to fall, torrential and unceasing, pouring down relentlessly for hours with no sign of stopping. Mrs. Hoa struggled to cover the leaky spots on her tiled roof. She used a bent beetle tray to catch the rainwater, which soon overflowed onto the floor. If her husband, Mr. Tien, were still healthy, these tasks would be trivial. But last spring, a construction accident left him paralyzed on one side. Now, Mrs. Hoa alone toiled to support her entire family, a disabled husband and 2 children in college. However, over the past year, her eldest daughter had started earning money to cover her own expenses and even helped Mrs. Hoa with a portion to support her younger siblings. This eased some of the heavy burden on Mrs. Hoa's shoulders. As the rain gradually subsided, Mrs. Hoa quickly tidied the yard before another downpour could arrive. She hurried to the market to buy groceries for dinner. Their dinner was always modest. Just a bowl of salted vegetables, a bowl of fish sauce, a plate of boiled water spinach, and a small portion of braised fresh shrimp with soy sauce. Only when their children visited would she prepare dishes like eggs, meat, or fish. No sooner had dinner finished than another storm rolled in, even more terrifying than the afternoons. The heavy rain caused a power outage across the entire village, forcing Mrs. Hoa to light an oil lamp for basic necessities. The flickering flame in the wind seemed to mirror the uncertain fate of its owner. It was late, but the storm still raged. Mrs. Hoa's heart was heavy with anxiety. She lay sleepless, tossing and turning. Mr. Tien, her husband, asked, "What's wrong, my dear?" Mrs. Hoa pressed a hand to her forehead, sighed thoughtfully, and said, "I don't know why, husband, but I feel so restless. I want to sleep, but I just can't close my eyes." Mr. Tien whispered, "Try to sleep, my dear. If only I were healthy, I could help you more. But my crippled body only adds to your burden." As he spoke, tears welled up in his eyes. Only those with very keen sight could discern the 2 shimmering trails of tears reflecting in the oil lamp's glow. He cried silently, not wanting his wife to know his pain. He reached for a hand fan, gently fanning Mrs. Hoa, and continued, "Who stays rich for 3 generations and who stays poor for 3? We may suffer, but hopefully our children will have a better life. Everyone has their own destiny. You can't always get what you want." Mrs. Hoa turned to her husband and quietly said, "Don't blame yourself, husband. I'm still healthy now. Who would ever wish for this to happen? We just have to work hard so our children can get a proper education and avoid being looked down upon later. Phuong is about to graduate and can take care of herself. As for Dan, I'll try to push through for another 2 years. Once all our children are grown, we can rest. If they earn money, you and I will be happy. If not, I still have an acre of rice field. If someone buys it, I'll sell it off. A portion for savings, a portion for capital to start a small business at home. With that, we'll have enough to eat." Hearing this, Mr. Tien was deeply moved. He thought about how his and Mrs. Hoa's lives had never known true comfort. He was already 60 this year, and Mrs. Hoa was 5 years younger. Several times, they had asked others to help them apply for poverty assistance, but they were always denied. Despite Mr. Tien's family being among the poorest in the village, they had never received social welfare benefits. Their children's tuition fees were never reduced by a single penny. Many compassionate people eagerly helped the couple send applications to the commune, but they received no response. After repeated failures, the couple gave up. Whether they received aid or not no longer mattered. They had grown accustomed to living in hardship. Their greatest wish now was for their children to grow up and be able to support themselves. Just as Mrs. Hoa stepped out, a hen perched on the wall, facing Mr. Tien's house, crowed 3 times. Mr. Tien watched it intently, his heart filled with unease. He knew that a hen crowing was a grave omen. According to ancient beliefs, if a hen crowed towards a certain direction, it meant someone in that direction would die. Therefore, people would often slaughter the hen immediately, hoping to avert the bad luck from their families. They would mix the hen's blood with cinnamon and star anise wine, then sprinkle it on an empty plot of land. Next, they would plant 3 incense sticks and pray to the deities to expel evil spirits. Mr. Tien knew all this, but he thought if he told Mrs. Hoa, it would only cause her more worry. The hen, after crowing, had already run off and he couldn't catch it in time, and Mr. Tien was disabled. Even his personal hygiene was difficult, let alone chasing a chicken. About an hour later, Mrs. Hoa returned from the market, but she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a young man. This was Tien, who had helped Phuong extensively during her university years. Phuong's current job had also been secured through Tien. It was comfortable and well-paying. He had even promised that if Phuong and Dan couldn't find jobs after graduation, he would ensure them stable positions at his company. Tien, one could say, was a benefactor to Mr. and Mrs. Tien's family. Today, Mrs. Hoa had bought chicken and fish to treat Tien. The elderly couple's meal had never been so lavish. Tien was highly regarded by Mr. and Mrs. Hoa. Besides helping their children, he had also assisted them during their most difficult times. After a warm lunch, they sat together, drinking water and chatting. Mrs. Hoa cheerfully said, "Tien, dear, knowing you're close to Phuong and Dan, my children, puts my mind at ease. If only there were more good people like you in the world, how wonderful that would be." Tien looked a bit embarrassed. "It's nothing, Auntie, that's just how I am. I feel uncomfortable if I don't help people in need." Mrs. Hoa nodded. "I know, dear." She paused for a moment, as if contemplating something, then asked Tien, "Oh, Tien, earlier this morning I tried to call Phuong, but it kept saying the line was busy. And she still hasn't called me back. Could you help me make a call to her so I can stop worrying?" Tien smiled and said, "Phuong is at work now, Auntie, so she can't answer her phone. Don't worry, both of you. Phuong is doing very well. I knew Phuong wouldn't be able to come home this week, so I came in her place to reassure you. You two should try to call her less often. If Phuong accidentally leaves her phone on during work, she might get fired, and her salary there is quite stable." Mr. and Mrs. Tien nodded in agreement. After lingering for another 5 minutes, Tien asked to leave. Before he left, he gave the couple 2 million dong, but they refused to accept it. The sky, which had been clear blue, suddenly echoed with thunder. Mrs. Hoa went out to the yard, looking up, and saw that the sun was still shining brightly. There was no storm. The elders often said that if thunder strikes on a sunny day, it is surely a bad omen. People in the past often lived by their instincts and superstitions, so their beliefs were often more fantasy than reality. Nowadays, people explain everything scientifically. 2 clouds of opposite charges colliding on a sunny day can also create lightning and thunder as usual. However, this phenomenon is rare but not impossible. Mrs. Hoa didn't dwell on it further. She washed some fruits and offered them at her ancestors' altar. Although she felt somewhat reassured by Tien's words, she thought that praying to her ancestors wouldn't be a waste. Another day was drawing to a close. Suddenly, it was 10:00 p.m. Mrs. Hoa wiped Mr. Tien's face with a towel, then let him go to rest first. The qualities of a woman were, to some extent, influenced by lingering feudal traditions. She always slept after her husband. When he rested, she would bury herself in work, and over time it became a habit, a custom, a nature that they implicitly assumed all women shared. Mrs. Hoa's phone rang, and she was overjoyed because the incoming call was from Phuong. "Hello, my daughter. Why couldn't I reach you earlier? Are you well, my dear? It's been months since you've visited your parents." The other end of the line remained silent, not a single reply. Mrs. Hoa continued, "Hello, Phuong, my child, can you hear me?" A moment later, a chilling sound emanated from the other end of the line, as if from the realm of the dead. "Mother, I'm dead." The call abruptly ended. Mrs. Hoa was so startled that she dropped her phone and rushed inside to tell Mr. Tien, who hadn't yet fallen asleep. After hearing her, Mr. Tien pondered for a moment, then said, "These young people nowadays love to play pranks. Call her again and see what happens." Mrs. Hoa nodded in agreement, but her phone was broken from the fall. She considered going to a neighbor's house to call, but it was late, and she didn't want to bother anyone. The poor couple sat silently on their cramped bed, the faint light from a small bulb illuminating the sorrow on their faces. Mr. Tien said, "All right, dear, lie down and rest. I don't think anything bad is happening. Don't worry so much." Mrs. Hoa nodded faintly, then slowly got up to close the door. Just as the door closed, a sudden gust of wind blew it open, almost making her fall. The wind carried a chilling cold that made her shiver, accompanied by a faint smell of blood, making her feel nauseous. Gazing out the gate, Mrs. Hoa saw the silhouette of a young woman clinging tightly to the riverbank in the faint moonlight. She could only make out a figure wearing a flowing white dress, tall and slender, but her face was obscured. Mrs. Hoa involuntarily uttered, "Phuong." She couldn't clearly see the woman's face, but based on her figure and a mother's intuition, she recognized that the girl standing there was Phuong. Mrs. Hoa hurried towards the gate, saying, "Phuong, why are you so late? Your mother hasn't gone to bed yet, child." As Mrs. Hoa got closer, Phuong quickly walked away, disappearing behind a brick wall covered in moss. In an instant, Phuong was gone. Mrs. Hoa stood stunned for a moment, hundreds of questions swirling in her mind without a single answer. A chilling premonition about Phuong's fate settled over her. She closed the gate, then ran quickly back into the house and recounted what had just happened to Mr. Tien. After listening, Mr. Tien said, "It's late, dear, you must be seeing Phuong. There are billions of people in the world. It's normal for someone to resemble another." Mrs. Hoa shook her head and said, "No, husband, I'm sure it was Phuong. Though she was far away and I couldn't clearly see her face, how could I mistake my own daughter's figure?" Mr. Tien replied, "If it was Phuong, why would she avoid you? And Phuong couldn't possibly run that fast. I think you miss our daughter too much, creating illusions." Mrs. Hoa insisted, "You don't understand, husband." After a moment, she continued, "Tomorrow I'll cook dinner in advance so you can reheat it later. I'm going to take a bus to Hanoi for a trip." Mr. Tien tried to dissuade her. "You're a farmer who's worked in the fields all year, never stepping foot in the city. What if you get lost?" Mrs. Hoa shook her head. "It's all right, I know my way around. Staying here consumed by worry isn't good either." That night, Mrs. Hoa couldn't sleep a wink. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined all sorts of strange and unsettling things. She cried a lot, thinking about the many sorrowful folk tales of ghosts returning to warn the living. Mrs. Hoa only dared to imagine that much. She didn't dare to think further, fearing that bad luck would befall her daughter. The moon was bright that night, and a gentle breeze blew, while the chirping of insects lulled others to sleep. Though nature provided such solace, she still couldn't sleep. Suddenly, she saw Phuong appear outside the window, her hair flowing naturally in the wind, her eyes deeply sorrowful, as if Phuong wanted to say something but couldn't utter a word. Mrs. Hoa saw this but could only lie there, watching her daughter, unable to get up. Her body felt as if it were pinned down by an invisible force. Her mouth also couldn't speak, though she desperately wanted to call her daughter. Phuong slowly receded into the distance, not forgetting to deliver a message to her mother. "Mother, I'm dead." That haunting sentence sent shivers down Mrs. Hoa's spine. She woke Mr. Tien, recounting what she had seen in a frantic, fearful voice. "Husband, Phuong, I saw Phuong outside the window again." This time, Mr. Tien was also alarmed, knowing that no one dreams the same dream repeatedly. But having no other choice, he could only offer words of reassurance. "Tomorrow, you'll go to Hanoi to visit our daughter. Overthinking won't help. Try to close your eyes and sleep, or you'll be exhausted on the bus tomorrow." Mrs. Hoa didn't react, but lay on her side, tears wetting her pillow, praying for dawn to break so she could go see her daughter. In her heart, she secretly wished Phuong was safe, yet she also considered the possibility of something unfortunate having happened or being about to happen. Would she be able to face it, or would she collapse? Questions arose, but she had no answers. Many thoughts swirled chaotically in the mind of the poor peasant woman. Her eyes, glistening with tears, reflected the late-night moon, remaining sleepless until the rooster crowed. After preparing the day's meals for Mr. Tien, Mrs. Hoa quickly packed a few belongings to catch a bus to the city. Throughout the journey from her village to Hanoi, the words, "Mother, I'm dead," echoed in her mind, a haunting obsession. She knew she might never forget them, even after she left this world. The bus arrived at the station, and the sun was high. After asking for directions, Mrs. Hoa eventually found Phuong's rented room, but the door was locked from the outside. Mrs. Hoa took a small piece of paper from her pocket, on which were written the phone numbers of people she needed to contact. Since her phone was broken, she asked a man standing nearby if she could use his mobile to call Phuong's number. She called 4 times, but there was no answer. Then she asked him to call Tien's number. On the second try, Tien answered. Mrs. Hoa quickly said, "Tien, my dear, I've come to Hanoi today to visit Phuong." "I finally found her rented room after asking around, but the door is locked. Do you know where she might be?" Tien replied. "Phuong is at work, Auntie," Mrs. Hoa asked. "But it's Sunday and she's still working?" Tien chuckled and replied, "Yes, Auntie. Working on a holiday means double pay. Phuong is very dedicated to her work. She often skips meals to work. She should really rest and take care of her health." Mrs. Hoa nodded faintly, but for some reason she still felt uneasy. After a moment, Tien suggested, "You should head back to the bus station now, Auntie, to avoid the afternoon traffic. It'll be very difficult to travel later. I'm busy with work, otherwise I'd come and take you home." Mrs. Hoa said, "No, you go on with your work, dear. I'll just head to the bus station." As Mrs. Hoa was about to turn, a gust of wind suddenly blew, knocking a bunch of keys from the eaves. Mrs. Hoa tried to reach for them, but she wasn't tall enough. After some thought, she decided to try the keys on Phuong's room door. As soon as the door opened, a blast of cold air hit Mrs. Hoa's face, making her hair stand on end. The room was tidy but not clean. Some spots were covered in cobwebs, the floor was dusty, and the kitchen and bathroom smelled faintly of mildew. Mrs. Hoa couldn't believe this was Phuong's room. From childhood, Phuong had always been a neat and clean person. It was unthinkable for her room to be so dirty. Mrs. Hoa initially thought the room had been empty for a long time, but then she reasoned that her daughter was busy working all day and didn't have time to clean. With that thought, she took a broom and a cloth and meticulously cleaned Phuong's rented room. It was already noon. Mrs. Hoa took out the rice she had prepared early that morning, along with some salted peanuts wrapped in a dried leaf. She ate, lost in thought about the strange events that had recently occurred. She wished she could just see Phuong now to ease her worries. After eating, she lay down on the bed where Phuong usually slept. As she drifted off to sleep, a sudden gust of wind blew into the room, making her shiver. Suddenly, Mrs. Hoa saw Phuong emerge from the bathroom, walking very slowly. Her face was pale and sickly, as if she had been weak for a long time. Her eyes were dark and sunken, like someone deprived of sleep, and her clothes were stained with dirt and blood. Her thin hands were covered in prominent blue veins. Mrs. Hoa was heartbroken at the sight and spoke through tears. "My child, have you just returned from work? Our family may be poor, but why must you suffer so much? If you earn money, you can help your parents, but if you can't, your parents will still take care of you. Who makes you work so hard that you look so frail and weak?" Mrs. Hoa wanted to get up and rush to embrace Phuong, but for some reason, her body felt as if it were weighed down by an invisible rock, making her unable to move. So, she could only lie there, crying and watching her daughter with profound sorrow. Phuong wept silently, her pale, dry lips trembling as if she wanted to say something, but then stopped. As Phuong remained silent, Mrs. Hoa continued, "Say something to me, child. I can't bear to see you like this. Why don't you quit this job and come back home with me? We'll have rice porridge if we have it, vegetables if we have them. You and Dan are all I have left. If either of you falls ill or suffers, it breaks my heart." Phuong shook her head gently, and a chilling voice emerged. "Mother, I'm dead." Mrs. Hoa cried out, "No, you're not dead. If you were dead, how could I be talking to you?" Phuong shook her head and replied, "I really am dead, Mother. I died unjustly, Mother." Suddenly, the wind blew something, causing it to hit the wall, creating a loud noise that startled Mrs. Hoa awake. It turned out she had been in a dream all along. Usually, a dream doesn't immediately come to mind upon waking. It takes some time to recall it. Some people even remember nothing. This is because dreams are a chaotic jumble, like fragmented stories pieced together when the human brain isn't truly at rest. No dream in the world unfolds as perfectly as a narrative work. Yet the story Mrs. Hoa had just experienced felt so real that her body was drenched in sweat. Her eyes were brimming with tears. Mrs. Hoa checked under the bed and then looked into the bathroom, but still couldn't find her daughter. Could it be that Phuong had really died? Was the wretched figure she saw just now Phuong's vengeful spirit returning to warn her in a dream? Mrs. Hoa pondered these questions. In her frantic state, a young man suddenly walked in. It was Dan, Mrs. Hoa's youngest son. Mother and son met with tearful joy. Dan immediately said, "Mother, when did you arrive? Why didn't you tell me?" Mrs. Hoa smiled and replied, "I came early this morning. It's almost noon now. Your school is far from here, so you must be tired, right?" Dan shook his head. "Tired? Not for a young man like me, Mother. I often take the bus to visit my sister. Yesterday, I called her and her phone was busy and she never called back. I had the day off today, so I came to see her and you." "Where is she, Mother?" Mrs. Hoa shook her head and said, "I don't know." Dan looked confused. He asked again, "Then how did you get in here, Mother?" After a moment of hesitation, Mrs. Hoa recounted the entire story to Dan. After listening, Dan was also filled with fear and dread. He cautiously asked, "Mother, could it be that my sister is really dead?" As he spoke, 2 lines of tears streamed down Dan's face. Mrs. Hoa couldn't contain her emotions either. Normally, she would scold Dan for speaking such ill words, but not now. This was something she had once dismissed as mere superstition. The room suddenly became strangely sorrowful. The haunting of Phuong's spirit remained an unsolved mystery. Mrs. Hoa stayed with Dan in Phuong's rented room until late, waiting to see if she would return, but she didn't. Dan made dozens of calls, but there was no activity on the other end. Until almost midnight, Mrs. Hoa and Dan remained awake, waiting for Phuong. They waited and waited, but Phuong never appeared. Mrs. Hoa and Dan began to feel frightened as the dream gradually seemed to be coming true. Mrs. Hoa said in a worried voice, "Let's go report this to the police, my son." Dan replied, "Let me take you tomorrow, mother. For now, let me call Tien." Dan had to call 3 or 4 times before Tien finally answered. Dan told Tien about being unable to reach Phuong. After a moment, Tien responded, "Oh, Phuong has been really busy at work lately, little brother." Dan replied, "But at least she should answer or call back later so her family doesn't worry, right?" Tien replied, "Phuong's phone must have a problem. I haven't been able to reach her for a few days either, but I occasionally go to her workplace and she's always diligently working. Tomorrow, I'll call her manager and tell them to contact your family. You and your parents don't have to worry." Dan nodded and hung up. He had put the call on speaker, so Mrs. Hoa also heard the conversation. Although somewhat reassured, Mrs. Hoa still felt a knot in her stomach. Her mood was very restless. Seeing the worry etched on his mother's face, Dan said, "Tien said that, mother, so what else is there to worry about? I'm sure Phuong will call back tomorrow." Mrs. Hoa pondered for a moment and said, "I still don't feel entirely at ease. Do you know where she works, son?" Dan nodded hesitantly. "Yes, mother, I still go there sometimes to pick up things for her, but lately I've been busy with exams, so I haven't been there." Mrs. Hoa said, "Then tomorrow you'll take me there so I can feel better." Dan nodded in agreement. That night, Dan and Mrs. Hoa stayed at Phuong's room. In the middle of the night, Dan got up to go to the bathroom. As he stepped into the toilet, Dan's hair suddenly stood on end, and his shoulders felt icy cold, as if someone had placed a block of ice on them. Even though it was quite warm today and there was no air conditioning in the room, Dan suddenly recoiled in shock, seeing Phuong in the mirror. Dan stood about 3 steps away. He turned his head, but there was absolutely nothing there, only a floor mop and a bottle of toilet cleaner. Dan nervously looked into the mirror again and saw Phuong standing there. Dan rubbed his eyes 2 or 3 times, then splashed water on his face to test his sobriety. When he looked up, he no longer saw his sister. Terrified, he ran quickly back to Mrs. Hoa. At this moment, Mrs. Hoa was still half asleep. Seeing him, she asked, "What's wrong, child? Why are you running around so frantically?" Dan turned on the light, poured a full glass of water, and drank it all, then recounted what had just happened to Mrs. Hoa. After listening, she cried, "It was just me before, but now you're making this nightmare come true? How am I supposed to live?" Mrs. Hoa buried her face in her hands and wept. Dan then comforted her. "Mother, it's probably because you're half awake and half dreaming, and you worried too much last night, so you're seeing things. I'll take you to Phuong's workplace tomorrow morning to put your mind at ease. Now, mother, try to sleep." Despite saying this, Dan was still very scared. The image of Phuong, vivid and real, was seared into his mind, preventing him from sleeping that night. Every time he closed his eyes, Dan imagined all sorts of horrifying things. However, Dan was at an age where he needed his sleep, so he eventually drifted off without realizing it. The alarm clock rang, indicating it was 6:30 a.m. Dan led Mrs. Hoa to a nearby pho restaurant for breakfast. Because her son pleaded with her, she took 2 or 3 bites, then stopped. Dan finished his mother's portion, then led her to the bus stop to go to Phuong's workplace. The distance wasn't too far, so they arrived quickly. This was a famous restaurant in Hanoi, and Phuong worked there as a manager. Every time Dan visited, his sister would treat him to a lavish meal. But today, he wasn't here for that. Dan asked a female manager who was sitting at Phuong's usual desk, "Excuse me, ma'am, is my sister not working today?" The woman replied, "Phuong has been absent for a few days without explanation, young man. We've tried to contact her many times but haven't been able to. Since you're here, I wanted to ask why Phuong is absent." Dan didn't know how to answer, so Mrs. Hoa quickly intervened. "Oh, it's nothing, dear. I'm Phuong's mother. I just came up from the countryside to visit her. Phuong has been a bit ill, so she's resting at home for a few days. Her phone is broken, so she can't be reached. She asked me to come here to request a leave of absence for about 3 to 5 days. When she recovers, she'll return to work. This boy here didn't know, so he asked unnecessarily. Please understand." The woman immediately softened. "Oh yes, Auntie, please tell Phuong to rest up and get well." Knowing that, the restaurant staff are relieved. Mrs. Hoa nodded sadly and left the restaurant with Dan. Standing on the busy street, watching the bustling traffic in the vibrant city, her heart ached. She wondered where Phuong was now. Was she alive or dead? If the dreams were true, Phuong had already crossed over to the other side. But if Tien's words were true, Phuong was still alive somewhere, unknown to her family. Mrs. Hoa asked Dan to call Tien. However, there was no answer on the other end. Dan called a few more times, but still no response. Mother and son sadly headed back to the bus stop to go home. On the way, Mrs. Hoa continuously prayed to Buddha, hoping for safe passage. She knew that Phuong's life was very precarious, as a dream never repeats itself twice. Yet, she had repeatedly seen Phuong in the guise of someone who had died unjustly. Moreover, her own son had also seen Phuong. Dan had personally witnessed his sister's image appearing in the mirror, and if Mrs. Hoa knew that a hen had crowed into her house, it would have surely shocked her. All these terrifying omens pointed to the conclusion that Phuong had departed from the mortal world. Yet Mrs. Hoa's family still held onto the belief that Phuong was alive. They trusted Tien's words, the person who had so generously helped them during their difficult times. Upon returning to the rented room, Dan poured his mother a glass of water and said, "Now we have to wait for Tien to call back, Mother. I believe Phuong is fine." After a moment, he added, "Oh, I'm worried about Father being home alone." Mrs. Hoa calmly replied, "Before I left, I asked Uncle Hai to look after your father. You don't have to worry. I'll stay here tonight. If Tien doesn't call back, then we'll have to report it to the police. How can I sit still now, not knowing if your sister is alive or dead?" By 10:00 p.m., Tien still hadn't called back, and Dan had tried calling him a dozen times without success. Mrs. Hoa wanted to go to the police, but Dan stopped her, saying, "Wait, Mother. Let's wait through tonight. If something happens, reporting it tomorrow won't be too late. I'm sure Tien has something very important keeping him from answering." Suddenly, a strong gust of wind swept through the rented room, causing both doors to bang as if they wanted to tear off their hinges. Outside, an owl hooted, a sound that made them jump. Dan quickly went to close the door, but before he could latch it, another powerful gust blew both doors wide open. This was a rare sight in life. No storm, yet such a terrifying wind. Mrs. Hoa and Dan could only stare at each other, no one able to explain the phenomenon. After a moment, the wind subsided, but the owl's hoots still echoed in the air, sending shivers down the spines of the faint-hearted. At that moment, Dan closed and locked the door and told his mother to go to bed. They lay down to rest their weary bodies, but neither could sleep. Mrs. Hoa put her hand on her forehead and whispered to Dan, "I only have 2 children. If something happens to your sister, I don't think I can go on living." Dan sighed, turning to look at his mother. "Don't worry, Mother. I know this sounds harsh, but even if my sister isn't here anymore, you still have me." Hearing this, Mrs. Hoa wept again. Dan also couldn't hold back his tears. The room suddenly became eerily somber. The darkness outside remained thick, occasionally punctuated by the distant barking of dogs and the rustling of leaves. Suddenly, Dan's phone rang. To his surprise, it was Phuong's number calling. Dan picked up the phone, his hand trembling uncontrollably. He didn't know if it was a person or a ghost calling. He immediately handed the phone to Mrs. Hoa. It took her a moment before she dared to put the phone to her ear, partly from anticipation, partly from fear of something she dared not imagine. The sound of crying coming from the phone made both mother and son shiver. It was an indescribably chilling sound. Recognizing it as her daughter's voice, Mrs. Hoa, weeping, asked, "My child, where have you been all day? Why didn't you answer my calls? Your whole family is so worried about you. Wherever you are, come home to me, come home, stay here with me, don't go to work anymore, I can support you." Phuong continued to cry. After a moment, she said, "I can't come home to you anymore, Mother." Mrs. Hoa asked, "Why?" Phuong replied, "I'm dead." With that, Phuong hung up. At that moment, Mrs. Hoa's legs felt lifeless. Her whole body trembled. She slowly turned to Dan and said with despair in her voice, "Your sister. She's really dead, my child." Dan nodded but tried to reassure his mother with a question, "Could it be that she's playing a trick on us?" Mrs. Hoa was silent, tears continuously falling onto the mat which still smelled new, then whispered, "No, your sister would never dare to play such a trick on me." That choked, trembling voice. "That wasn't the voice of someone alive, my child." After saying that, she embraced Dan and cried uncontrollably like a child. Dan felt pity for both his sister and his mother. He often told his friends that there were 2 women in the world he loved the most, his mother and his sister. He had no way to comfort his mother at that moment. other than offering his shoulder as a support for the thin, frail body of the peasant woman who had clung to every fiber of her being all year round. He instinctively knew that he had to be strong to be the pillar of his family. It hurts to lose a loved one, but he had to remain calm to resolve everything. Dan thought deeply. Although he hadn't seen Phuong's body, her restless spirit had appeared to her family multiple times, making it impossible to deny her passing. Around 5 a.m., Tien called Dan back. Tien, weeping, reported over the phone that Phuong's body had been found at the bottom of a 200-meter-deep ravine. At the same time, Tien arranged for a car to take Mrs. Hoa and Dan back to their village immediately. Tien and a few friends sorted everything out and brought Phuong's body back later. Seeing his wife and son return, Mr. Tien was overjoyed and said, "You two came back so early. Why didn't you stay until late afternoon? And Phuong, she didn't come back with you." Seeing the expressions of profound sorrow on Mrs. Hoa's and Dan's faces, he asked again, "What happened?" Dan said, "Sister Phuong, she's dead, father." Mr. Tien was stunned, as if struck dead. So the ominous crowing of the hen had indeed come true, and Mrs. Hoa seeing Phuong's ghost was also a reality. Now he couldn't help but believe it, but he still asked to be sure, "Did they find her body?" Dan nodded and replied, "Yes, Tien found it." As soon as Dan finished speaking, Tien's car, along with a group of people, arrived with Phuong's body. Phuong's body was quickly brought inside, to the shock of her relatives. Dan had to lead his mother into the bedroom to prevent her from collapsing, which she could do at any moment. Phuong's body had turned a purplish blue, with many bruises and abrasions from hitting rocks. White maggots, already at work decomposing the corpse, had appeared in her eye sockets and nostrils. Suddenly, blood gushed profusely from the corpse's mouth, ceaselessly. The corpse's tightly closed eyes suddenly sprang open, as if she might come back to life. This was a rare and unusual phenomenon, because after death, the human body no longer has blood. Yet, the blood still flowed, still bright red as if she were alive. And the corpse opening its eyes was even more illogical, defying the laws of nature. If this story were spread, no one would believe such an absurd phenomenon could exist in this world. But everyone present had witnessed this unprecedented and bizarre occurrence with their own eyes. Even Mr. Tien, Phuong's biological father, couldn't help but shudder when he saw the strange phenomena appearing on his daughter's body. After washing the corpse with star anise and cinnamon water, according to traditional custom, they proceeded with the embalming and placed Phuong's body in the coffin before the sun reached its zenith. Phuong's funeral was sparsely attended because her parents didn't have many close relatives. Mostly neighbors came to help. Because Phuong was young, only a few white mourning headbands were subtly visible in the house. The atmosphere of mourning was stiflingly sad, pervaded by the faint scent of incense from the red coffin. Anyone who saw Phuong's photo couldn't hold back their tears. They had all thought Phuong would bring pride and prosperity to her parents because she was on the path of economic development. But fate had cruelly taken Phuong's life, leaving endless sorrow for her family and loved ones. The sun gradually set in the west, and darkness prepared to envelop the peaceful countryside. Just one more night, and tomorrow morning, Phuong would return to the earth. Her body, embraced by sacred ancestors, offered some solace amidst immense pain. Tien diligently managed the funeral arrangements from morning till night. From the outside, he seemed like a genuine family member. Despite being quite exhausted, Tien never sighed once. Mr. and Mrs. Tien found comfort in this on behalf of Phuong's soul. By 9:00 p.m., all the neighbors had left, leaving only a few close relatives sitting together on a smoke-filled mat in the middle of the yard. Tien began his confession. When everyone had calmed down, I felt I should speak. That day, I had an urgent work assignment at the company, from morning until late at night. When I was returning, I saw a crowd gathered by the roadside because the path was blocked, so I got out of my car to ask for passage. I then learned that people were trying to retrieve a motorcycle accident victim from a ravine. When I saw Phuong, I felt as if I had died on the spot. I couldn't believe my eyes. When I identified her as a relative, they initially wouldn't let me claim her because they didn't believe me. They demanded that the authorities handle the case. So, I had to frantically search for Phuong's birth certificate and ID so they could verify her identity. After that, they agreed to let me take Phuong home. When I received Phuong's body, I intended to call you immediately, Auntie, but I was so heartbroken seeing her body. I couldn't understand how she could have fallen into the ravine like that. Her motorcycle was also heavily damaged and completely broken. As he spoke, Tien's eyes welled up with tears. Those around him couldn't help but feel emotional. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, knocking Phuong's portrait to the ground. Tien rushed to pick it up, and a shiver ran through his entire body, goosebumps appearing. As Tien placed the portrait back on the altar, he noticed Phuong's eyes in the photo seemed to be bleeding, staring at him with immense resentment. Terrified, Tien stepped back, only to bump into someone. He turned around and realized it was Dan. Tien was drenched in cold sweat, his face pale. Dan asked, "What's wrong, Anne?" After a moment, Tien replied, "I'm fine, it's nothing. I just suddenly feel unwell. I need to go home first, okay?" Tien bid everyone farewell and sped off on his motorcycle without a single glance back. On the road, Tien was still trembling from the terrifying scene he had just witnessed. After covering about a third of the journey, heavy rain poured down and lightning illuminated the sky. The road was deserted and desolate, with only an occasional motorcycle flashing past. Fortunately, Tien was driving a car, otherwise he would have surely fallen gravely ill from such a downpour. After a short distance, Tien saw a girl by the roadside, wearing a white dress that was completely soaked by the rain. She intentionally flagged down Tien's car, asking for a ride. Since it was still raining, Tien let her in. Tien looked in the rearview mirror, wanting to see her face, but it was covered by her wet hair. Tien ventured to ask, "Where are you going?" The girl replied, "I don't have a home." Tien shivered, for the girl's voice was as cold as ice. It sounded very familiar. Tien felt he had met her before. Tien began to feel scared, so he didn't ask any more questions. As he neared his house, Tien said, "We're almost at my house and the rain has stopped. You can get off now." There was no reply. Tien turned around to look, but the girl was no longer there. Tien knew he had just encountered a female ghost asking for a ride. A phenomenon he thought only existed in the mythical stories told by old women to scare young children. Yet today, Tien himself had experienced it, seen with his own eyes and heard with his own ears. There was no denying it. Upon reaching his home's yard, Tien still didn't feel at ease. He felt as if someone was clinging to him throughout the entire journey home. Tien lived alone. Several times, he thought about going to a friend's house to sleep, but then he decided against it. As Tien opened the door, a white shadow darted quickly past him. Tien jumped, quickly turning on the light. Indeed, there was nothing there. The house was still quiet, and the furniture was in its usual place, with no signs of disturbance. When Tien stepped into the bathroom to wash his face, he suddenly heard the clack-clack of women's high heels coming from the stairs. A moment later, there was no sound. Tien seemed utterly terrified. He cupped his hands and splashed cold water from the faucet onto his face, hoping to regain his composure. But when he looked up, he saw Phuong standing eerily by the door. Tien turned around, but she was gone. Overwhelmed by fear, he summoned all his courage and ran straight to his room, bolting the door. Tien was usually very brave. He never believed in ghost stories or superstitions. This was the first time in his life he felt terrified by the spirit of the deceased. It was none other than Phuong, the person he had always wholeheartedly helped. Tien lay still, replaying all the horrifying events that had just happened, when he heard a knock at the door. At first, Tien thought it was a burglar, but that couldn't be, because no burglar would knock so politely. Moreover, security in this area was excellent. It was rare for burglars to break into homes. Then he decided he was hearing things, even though his sense of hearing was still perfectly fine. The knocking grew louder and more insistent. Tien gripped his hands, then slowly approached the door. He took a deep breath and courageously flung the door open. No one was there. The space was utterly silent under the warm yellow light emanating from the stairs. Tien returned to his bed with a pale face, utterly drained of color, his heart pounding so fast it felt like it would burst from his chest. His muscular hands, from years of gym training, gripped the thin blanket tightly in fear. Having no other choice, Tien picked up his phone and called a friend to come stay with him, hoping it would lessen his fear. On the other end, a girl's voice said, "This is Phuong." At that, Tien gasped, dropping the phone. The number that had just called him was Phuong's. Tien guessed that her vengeful spirit was still lingering there. He immediately knelt on the floor, clasped his hands together, and said, "Phuong, my dear, I swear by heaven and earth that I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Please, your spirit, don't cling to me anymore. Tomorrow, I will go to your house and confess, and then I will surrender myself to the court to accept my punishment. I beg you, Phuong, let me have one last peaceful night's sleep in my own home. I know the wrong I committed is beyond redemption. You died unjustly and cannot find peace, I know. I regret it deeply now. If only I had controlled my lust that day, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. I regret it so much. Please don't haunt me anymore. That night, Tien couldn't close his eyes without Phuong's image appearing in his mind. He sat there, numb and lifeless, like someone who had lost his soul, his face drained of all color. Tien set his alarm for 5 a.m., then drove back to Mrs. Hoa's house. At that time, Phuong's funeral was sparsely attended, with only a few people coming and going. Tien called Mrs. Hoa's family to stand before Phuong's coffin, then began to recount, without pause, the entire sequence of events that led to her death. That day, it was a weekend, and both Tien and Phuong had the day off. Tien proactively called Phuong and invited her to see a movie that evening. Phuong immediately agreed as she was free. On the way, the two chatted very animatedly. Tien continuously brought up topics of romance, making Phuong blush. Being a smooth talker, Tien knew how to tease without offending Phuong. He knew where to stop, never going too far so Phuong wouldn't misunderstand. Several times, Tien had intended to ask Phuong to be his girlfriend, but she always deflected. When they arrived at the cinema, Phuong coincidentally ran into her ex-boyfriend. Although they had broken up, they remained friends, laughing and talking naturally like two old friends meeting again. Tien saw this and was furious, but he didn't show it on his face, knowing that his relationship with Phuong was merely platonic, so he had no reason to be jealous. Tien had helped Phuong a lot, hoping to win her love, but she seemed oblivious to it. Phuong genuinely valued Tien, but it was merely the affection a younger sister had for an older brother, not romantic love. When they left the cinema, Tien was sullen and didn't talk to Phuong. Phuong knew the reason but chose not to bring it up to avoid more trouble. As the car reached Phuong's rented room, heavy rain suddenly poured down. That day, Tien had ridden his motorcycle and hadn't brought a raincoat. He was reluctant to leave until the rain stopped. Having no other option, Tien agreed to stay at Phuong's place. Phuong offered Tien a glass of water, then excused herself to take a shower. Through the glass partition, Tien watched as Phuong slowly undressed, and his lust began to ignite. A body he had long craved was now nude before his eyes. Phuong was naturally beautiful and exercised regularly, giving her a very ideal figure. Throughout high school and college, many young men had noticed her. Despite being born into a poor family and having to help her mother farm since she was young, Phuong still maintained a rare, fair complexion. Her simple dress sense still attracted many admiring glances from young men. Tien was one of them. The first time they met, Tien felt an immediate attraction to Phuong. His help to Phuong and her family during their difficult times was partly driven by his desire to possess the woman he coveted. Watching Phuong shower, Tien's mind filled with countless depraved and wicked thoughts. Tien wanted to leave, but his desire kept him rooted. Tien thought that if he didn't possess Phuong's body today, he would never get another chance. As soon as Phuong emerged from the bathroom, Tien lunged at her, covering her mouth, then committed his heinous act. With Phuong's strength, how could she resist the strong arms of a man who had been exercising for years? Her cries merged with the torrents of rain lashing against the tin roof, so no one heard them. Tien threw Phuong onto the bed, using the force of his two arms to pin her down, then tore off her clothes. Seeing her full breasts, Tien became even more like a hungry lion that had been starved for a long time. The more Phuong struggled, the harder Tien pressed down. More scratches appeared on her body, some even bleeding. Yet, Tien did not stop his wicked behavior. He became increasingly violent, making Phuong feel as if she wanted to die multiple times. After achieving his pleasure, Tien leaned into Phuong's ear and whispered, "You're beautiful, dear. Now you belong to me." Tears streamed down Phuong's face. She wished she could die right then to end the humiliation. But wishing to die doesn't mean it happens. Tien wouldn't let her bite her tongue to commit suicide. Phuong thought of her family, of her parents who had worked so hard to raise and support her. And now, her body had been defiled by a beast. She looked Tien directly in the face and screamed, "You dog. I never thought you'd be so vile." Tien smirked and said, "If you loved me, this lovemaking would have been gentle. But you resisted and even talked to another man. I looked at you and I couldn't bear it, so I had to resort to this lowly act." Phuong's eyes widened. She used all her strength in her right foot to kick Tien squarely in his groin, sending him sprawling to the ground. She tried to crawl away, but he grabbed her hair, pulled her back, then pushed her onto her back and sat on her chest, slapping her face hard several times, making her dizzy. As he slapped her, he gritted his teeth and said, You tried to damage my reproductive organ and run away, did you? Let's see where you'll hide." Then he took a pillow and the thin blanket and pressed them firmly over Phuong's face. Not long after, she suffocated and died. To erase the traces, he immediately took Phuong's body away in the night, then threw her body along with her motorcycle into a ravine to create a fake accident scene. Because the rain was so heavy, it seemed no one was passing by. Yet, he wasn't discovered. Near dawn, Tien returned to Phuong's rented room to meticulously clean up any bloodstains on the bed and floor. The sheets and blankets were all replaced with new ones, so when Mrs. Hoa and Dan arrived at the room, they couldn't suspect anything. It wasn't until yesterday, because Dan had made so many calls, that Tien feared Phuong's family would report her disappearance to the police. So, he concocted a plan to trick a young boy, telling him to report to nearby people that a body had been found in the ravine. He pretended to be a passerby who was curious and went down to look. He quickly found a way to bring Phuong's body home as soon as possible, preventing people from reporting it to the authorities. At that time, someone said, "I know this is your relative, but you should still report it to the authorities." Tien cried and said, "Sir, if we report it now, who knows when my sister's body will be released? She's already suffered from the cold here for days. Not to mention, if they dissect her body, our family will surely be devastated. Her body is already bruised and battered from hitting rocks. If forensic doctors now use sharp, cold knives on her skin and flesh, her soul below won't rest in peace. Please, just let me bring people to take my sister home, I beg you 1,000 times." Seeing Tien speak like this, everyone present sympathized. Some even cried as if mourning a loved one. Just 15 minutes later, a large car arrived to transport Phuong's body home to her family. As Tien finished his confession, thunder suddenly roared in the bright, sunny sky. No one there could have imagined that Tien was Phuong's murderer. If her spirit hadn't haunted Tien, forcing him to reveal the truth, perhaps for many bitter years to come, no one would have known that Phuong died from being raped. And Phuong's wrongful death would have been buried by time. No one in this world remembers someone forever. But heaven has eyes, allowing Phuong's spirit to roam freely in this mortal world and compel the wicked person to confess his crime in front of many witnesses. All those standing there couldn't contain their outrage, especially Dan. He wanted to rush forward and kill that beast to avenge his sister. But he was held back by the adults. Mr. Tien clenched his hands on his wheelchair, his face red with fury, and roared, "You son of a bitch, you killed my daughter, now you'll pay." Hearing this, Mrs. Hoa seemed to collapse, and someone standing nearby had to support her, or she would have fallen to the ground long ago. An elderly man standing there said, "Hand him over to the law. He committed a grave crime, but if anything happens to him, we will also bear the guilt." Another person, unable to control his anger, said, "Let's cut him into pieces." More and more people gathered. Tien seemed unaware of what he had just said. Had some force compelled Tien to speak the truth, even though he had no intention of doing so? But as people murmured and discussed, he suddenly ran quickly to his motorcycle and sped off. Many others on motorcycles chased after him, but ultimately couldn't catch him. At first, they were able to keep up, but later lost all trace. Before becoming a businessman, Tien was a renowned racer, having won 3 city championships. Therefore, chasing his vehicle was not an easy feat. As he was speeding like the wind on the road, Tien suddenly felt his motorcycle slow down, as if carrying a very heavy object. Tien looked in his rearview mirror and saw Phuong sitting there. Her eyes stared intensely at Tien, as if she wanted to kill him. Overwhelmed by terror, Tien drove straight into the ravine and died. The place where Tien plunged to his death was also the very spot where Phuong's body had rested.